pass on to the next one. Thank you. So just very quickly, I wanted to recap where we are in terms of the movement. So Philanthropy for Climate movement now has 580 foundations that have signed either one of the national philanthropy commitments or the International Philanthropy Commitment on climate change. We are already spread across 19 countries. And more to come, which means that since 2019, when the UK funders commitment was launched until now, we have grown very quickly and very substantially across different parts of the world. If we can go to the next one, Natalia, please. So, next one, yeah, please. So just a brief reminder, I think you all know that, but it's always important to remind you that the International Philanthropy Commitment is a call to all foundations. So not only climate foundations, not only environmental foundations, but all foundations working in different elements of social actions and agendas, status in different countries, to come together and signal their commitment on climate change. So this is a movement that actually wants to open the doors for climate actions to different types of philanthropies, from a very local level to a global level, regardless of where you are and what is a specific topic or strategic direction. So Natalia, if you can go to the next one. And because of that, it's always important to remind what this commitment entails. What are we talking about? What we expect from signatories when they join the movement. These commitments are based in different pillars of actions, which looks into the philanthropic activities in a holistic approach, which means that sometimes some foundations will start from educating their boards or setting up education schemes with their staff members, others will start from their endowments, others through advocacy or even integration. That is the topic that we are just going to discuss today. That's fine. That's part of the different journeys, and each foundation needs to understand it's easier and better for them to start. The important thing is that everybody starts and that everybody looks into all elements of its actions that can contribute to tackle the climate emergency. Natalia, if you can go to the next one, please. So there are several resources that are available in this space. Active Philanthropy itself will share in a minute many others. But if you go to the website, we have been constantly updating different publications, different learning journeys, different tools that could be useful in your journey. And specifically looking into integration, we have interesting resources from WINGS members, basically Ariadne and Candid, for instance, and Edge funders that could be particularly useful for climate justice lens. So next one, please, Natalia. So getting into our topic today, the International Philanthropy Commitment on Climate Change, Pillar 3, integration, says that within the design and implementation of our programs, we'll seek opportunities to contribute to a fair and lasting transition to a net zero world, and to support adaptation to climate change impacts, especially in the most affected communities. I wanted to bring back the text of the commitment because, of course, each organization will interpret and use this text and this element as it sees fit. But it's important to bear in mind that this pillar addresses a lot of those questions like, I am an education funder, I'm a health funder. I don't necessarily want to become a climate funder, but I do want to bring climate lens to my strategies and my programs. How do I do that? What should I do? So this pillar is precisely about that. And I'll let actually Felicita and Johannes to go much deeper on that. If you can go to and this is my last actually input today. In our implementation guide, which is a list, brings a list of activities and possibilities of how to do that in practice, we have several ideas on how to get started, to how to be a champion in that specific pillar. And I wanted to bring like 3 concrete examples here that we can even explore in the breakout groups. And I'm sure Active Philanthropy will touch upon some of those in more detail. One is the idea to organize a climate strategy session for programmatic staff, which means that if you want to bring your programmatic people on board, we need to bring like the climate lens to their own operational mode and moments where they get together. Second, it's to review your existing grants and programs to assess whether you are already supporting climate positive action. Sometimes that's always the case, that we realize that we are already doing something, we are just not framing it as climate. And it's important in this journey that you think about that. And last but not least, to collaborate with other funders and organizations in the field to integrate these actions. We do have in this group here today some funders that are completely new to the climate agenda, and others such as IKEA, and Jasmine is here, that are actually very knowledgeable and have many tools to engage. So cross collaboration between philanthropic institutions is a very powerful tool that you could use. Well, I'll stop here and maybe give a warm welcome to Felicitas, who is going to guide us through the next piece of the session. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Alice, and wonderful to see you all across so many different time zones, from the breakfast table to nearly dinner. Absolutely amazing. And I have to say that I'm super happy to see so many people here who are ready to take an hour and a half out of your busy schedules and really model the leadership that we need to drive this forward, because there is no way out of the climate and intersected crises we're facing. And it's so important that you as funders and foundation staff are willing to jump into that and to provide leadership for your peers, and either inside the organization or inside your national association. So thank you very, very much for being on board. We are super excited to be able to discuss the topic with you today. It was our start into our new focus on climate, which we set out on 4 years ago, because we had also worked mainly on the traditional funders topics like education, financial literacy, schoolwork transition, and so on, for 12 years, as well as on climate. And we felt that it was really important to show the intersections between climate and how we described it in the first report that Johannes was the chief author of, how climate intersects with virtually every area foundations are involved in. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Johannes. In terms of structure, we'll have Johannes provide an input first, then we'll have a fantastic case study from London. Very excited by that because it's going to get super concrete. So hang in there. Radhika is already online. And we'll really hear from the ground how an integration happened of a climate lens. And then we'll go into groups and discuss some of the challenges, some of the ideas that you all bring, because as Alice said, the peer-to-peer is really important, and wrap it up with a lot of resources. So it's going to be a lot of content. I hope you all have a nice cup of coffee or water somewhere, and I'll pass it over to Johannes to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicitas. A warm welcome from my side as well. Could we get the slide up, please? There we go. I'll start with back to the last one, please. I'll start with this. Some of you guys might recognize this landscape, and I also think we have some people from South America amongst us. It's, as some of you may know, the Amazon rainforest, and it's a landscape that has long been primed for regulating the world's climate. And the reason for that is that this ecosystem stores a lot of carbon in its trees, in its plants, in its soil. However, last year, Brazilian scientists found that the forest's ability to store carbon is quickly diminishing. It's diminishing so much so that the Amazon is emitting more carbon than it stores, contributing rather than actually mitigating climate change. Now, this example shows that climate change is, of course, an issue that needs urgent attention. It also shows one of the well-known intersections between climate on the one hand and an important funding area, which is environmental conservation. Next slide, please. My name is Johannes Lundershausen from Active Philanthropy, and what I would like to spend during the next 10 minutes or so is to talk a little bit more about this idea of intersections. I'd like to encourage you to integrate climate change into your existing giving, even if environmental conservation is not your main focus area, but there are many others. I think most of you participating today are grant makers or you support grant makers. And whether you represent a community foundation or family fund or corporate foundation, you address some of the main challenges that societies face today. Some of you make democracies more resilient against populism, others advance gender equality or fight for better healthcare. Now, in today's world, all of these social goals and many others are achievable, but they can only be achieved when climate change is taken into account. Personally, before I came to philanthropy, I worked in science, and scientists have warned us for many years about the consequences of climate change. But now the time of predictions and warnings is over, because we can see these consequences every week, everywhere around the world. At the moment, for example, again in Australia, with the severe flooding. This is, of course, why many of you have already signed the funders' commitment on climate change. And next slide, please. We at Active Philanthropy want to help you to implement it, specifically to integrate mitigation and adaptation into your funding. To do so, we work with exactly this idea of intersections. Climate intersections are areas where established funding topics quite naturally overlap with priorities in the fight against climate change. These intersections include nature conservation, as I already mentioned, but also democracy, health, which Radhika will speak a little bit more about later, education, disadvantaged groups, and many others. The beauty about this idea of intersections is that they help you to integrate climate change into your work without losing sight of the issues that have always been close to your and your foundation's heart. Next slide, please. At Active Philanthropy, we published, Felix has already mentioned it, a report on intersections, sharing the stories of about a dozen organizations and funders that are already working at those intersections. But let me illustrate by way of two examples what that means. I will be talking about democracy and disadvantaged groups. Let me start with democracy. Next slide, please. Societies all around the world, in all of the countries that you come from, must transform in order to mitigate and adapt to climate change. This transformation poses a huge challenge, especially for democratic and just decision-making at the local level. Some regions, however, are affected more than others. An example pictured here is that of Lusatia, one of Germany's main traditional coal mining regions. Here, the phasing out of coal in Germany by 2038 poses a risk to 16,000 jobs in the region. Even in current times of energy crisis, these changes and these decisions are necessary in order to reach net zero. But in the short term, of course, they come at a cost. In our report, under the heading of Just Transitions, we discuss how such costs can be distributed across societies in an equitable way. In Lusatia, 6 billion euros in state funding have been made available in order to incubate businesses and also to establish new research infrastructures. But of course, not all countries and regions can benefit from such state funding. However, foundations do have a role to play here. Where there is such funding available, then they can accompany funding and ensure equitable outcomes. Where there isn't, they can also independently incubate solutions for an economic transition towards net zero. not just the issue of just transition, of course, but also populism, migration, other points that fall under the heading of democracy are closely connected to climate change. And in our report that you can find in the resource section that Alice mentioned, you'll find more information on that. But let me talk about a second intersection that's important. That's disadvantaged groups. Next slide, please. Climate change, of course, affects all of our lives, but not everybody is affected equally. Hardest hit are those disadvantaged groups, including elderly people, people of color, people with disabilities, but also children or women, such as here pictured Constance Okolet from Uganda. Like millions of women around the world, she is responsible for the care work, but also for agricultural labor and food collection in her family. The impacts of climate change make all of these activities much more difficult. Constance Okolet could see that for the first time in 2007 when flooding wiped out her entire harvest. The important thing with disadvantaged groups is that events such as floods do not just affect them on a temporary basis while the flood is lasting, but they fortify their exclusion from society, from decision-making structures and opportunities. It is much more difficult, for example, for women to gain education or financial independence when they have to work harder to make up for such a lost harvest. In the case of Constance, in the meantime, she's mobilized their community and they've found alternatives. They've grown mango and avocado trees, which provide valuable crops, but they also prevent soil erosion and therefore provide protection in the next case, in the next flood. This example shows that disadvantaged groups can be agents of change in the face of the climate crisis. But what's important for foundations and funders is that these groups do need additional support. Several case studies in our report really illustrate this. The Edge Funders Alliance, for example, underlines that disadvantaged groups must be given a voice both in the planning and in the implementing of funding projects. The reason for that is that only they know which measures actually work locally and which ones do not. Next slide, please. Responding to climate change is, of course, a challenge of enormous scope. It ranges from the livelihoods of Bangladeshi women and their children, pictured here, who are making a living from sorting plastic bottles, all the way towards the construction of new wind turbines here in Durham County in the UK. Seemingly disparate issues in different parts of the world concerning different people are suddenly closely interconnected. To let me illustrate this, by 2030, the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions from plastic could be as large as 300 new coal power plants. Plants which wind turbines, on the other end, on the other side of the world, are seeking to provide an alternative to. But what does that mean for funders? How can we tackle such complex relations between ostensibly different issues? By working together. It's not enough to rely on foundations that specialize on climate change. Every funder has got an intersection at the center of its heart, at the center of its funding programs that can help to tackle the climate crisis. So the main message really is, it doesn't matter which area you engage in. Each and every one of you can play an active part in shaping the future of our climate. And what's also important is that the first next steps are really easy and far from unachievable. Identify the intersection that's close to your heart. Many of you already know that intuitively. Look at the resources available and join a thematic group that's organized by Philea, Environmental Funders Network, and others. So thank you for your attention for the moment. What we would like to do now is have a little exercise on Slido, next slide please, where we can quickly survey the intersections that might be interesting for you. So I think if you click on that link, Alice just posted it in the chat, or you use your phone with this QR code, then you'll be directed to that survey, and it should just take a couple of seconds to complete it.
Can you maybe share the QR code again? If any of you is having problems, let us know in the chat, and we'll leave the QR code is up left.
Yeah, so maybe we stay with that for a second. So there are already a lot of issues coming up. I presume health is the strongest one that most of you guys have put in. So it's great that we have Radhika here later to talk about her work at this intersection. And there are important intersections, especially in urban areas, but also in tropical regions. Some of the other ones include gender, which I spoke about, the conservation issue of forest restoration, strongly connected to mitigation, but also, of course, the overarching guiding principle, I would say, of climate philanthropy, which is social justice and climate justice, including equity. Can we just, Natalie, go to the next question, looking at how many people have already started considering climate change at that particular funding area?
The 100% is difficult because the yes was me. So I'm waiting for some others.
I think 10 people have responded and they've all said yes.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
That's even better. So given that there were a lot of health funders, what would be interesting to know is how you've started integrated climate change. Radhika, maybe that might be a good precursor also to your input. Is there anyone who would like to share that with us? How have you started? What did it look like when you started to think about climate change in that funding area?
I can talk a little bit. I had some trouble with Slido at first, so I wasn't able actually to
fill out that question. But our foundation specifically is funding rural communities. And so we're funding all kinds of different aspects of rural communities. And I came on as the climate action person, and we started working with a partner that was oriented towards health among young people. And so we found that we could fund active transportation projects that were happening in a lot of schools, because that was a wonderful intersection of health and including mental health and climate change. So what happened was, our partnership, the organization that was working on health issues would kick in like half the money, and we would kick in half the money, and then we were able to fund several different active transportation projects in schools.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Radhika, is that a good point maybe for you to take over?
We're doing this as double act with me and Felicitas, yes?
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much, Johannes. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Radhika Bynum to you from the Impact on Urban Health, which is the grant-making arm of the Guy's and St. Thomas Foundation. That's a London-based, place-based foundation, which is focusing on health and equity. And what we found particularly exciting in you joining us, Radhika, is that you've gone through this process of integrating climate across the organization, including looking at the finance, which with an endowment of 1 billion is, of course, a really important move. So let me just turn it over to you. You'll take us a little bit through the program so the process that you undertook within the foundation and within the Impact on Urban Health. And we would love to encourage you all, if you've got questions along the input of Radhika, just put them in the chat, and then we can draw from these questions in a little Q&A after your input. But over to you, Radhika.
Great. If somebody could do my first slide, that'd be great. So yes, as Felicitas said, so we're a health foundation, and we're place-based, so we're focused specifically in South London. And one of the things that one of the very first things that we have done around health and climate is that some time ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, we started a program on the health effects of air pollution. Obviously, the connections between air pollution and climate change, like it isn't that straightforward, but it's definitely an entry point. And so we have got so it's part of our core business. We are looking at what the health impacts of air pollution are, and there is a real clear connection there to climate. So when I started here a couple of years ago, we were already doing climate work in the sense of the air pollution. But what we hadn't done was thought about it across the bulk of our work. So it was there, so the first thing that I'll be honest, when I started here, I thought it's obvious. Like, do I have to explain to people that climate change is going to have health impacts? Like, is this something that we have to show? If, everything we know about climate change, this is going to really, really affect quality of life and have really serious effects on health. But anyway, it was clear that isn't an understood thing, that we had to make a case for that. So one of the very first things we did was we ran a lunchtime seminar, opened to all the staff, invited all the staff to it, and drew some of that stuff into sections. But particularly, the other thing that has happened very recently in the last few years in this organization is that we have taken a really clear focus on inequality. So I did the lunchtime session on health inequalities and climate. So really, because people were really interested in inequalities and trying to say that actually climate change exacerbates existing inequalities and really drawing those connections. So that was for us, a helpful step into it. We're already talking about air pollution, but this is about actually saying across everything else we're doing, we're, you know, the people that we are most worried about, the people who are furthest from health equities, their lives are going to be significantly affected by climate change. So that was a starting point. So that was one thing we did. And then the other thing, just to think about, to say, is that one of the very first things we did was, stating the bleeding obvious, was that we created a climate working group. So we invited across organizations, can I flick to the next slide? Thanks. We encouraged people across the organization to come and join a working group during work hours, where we would have an hour meeting once a month, where we would start exploring this. What was great about that was that we really recruited, and we were able to recruit, but also encourage people from different parts of the organization to come. So I sit in the grants bit, but we got people from the operations side, from the endowment side, people who are worried about the money. From the property side, we own a whole load of property. That's part of how we get our money. The people from all across the organization. So it felt really, really important to bring a whole range of people together. And what all those people had in common was that we work here and we're all really concerned about climate change. So that was, you know, a group of enthusiastic amateurs. None of us were experts on this, but, like, you know, kind of had a personal drive. And so I think that one of the things about climate change is that there's a whole bunch of people who are personally deeply anxious about it, deeply motivated to take action on it in every aspect of their lives. And so to find a way of doing this in their work is like a real, you know, it's something they're wanting to do. So people volunteer onto the climate action group, but they also do work in the climate action group. You know, they do the heavy lifting that this kind of work takes because of a personal commitment. So that's a really important thing. So one of the things I would say that was useful for us was to recruit widely and get a group of enthusiasts. And the other thing that has really helped us was that the range of people that joined that group were also from different levels of seniority in the organization. So that really helps, you know, to work hard to try and get some senior people on board. Really helped. And I think we have one or two, we have one director and one assistant director who sits on the group, and that's been really, really helpful because they have access to the rooms that can help us to mainstream this work. And I guess the next thing that we did, so we were working for about a year, just thinking, what can we do, and trying different things. We asked for a bit of money, we were given that. We surveyed the organization to understand, to see what the appetite was in across the teams. We got some really interesting data back. So we did some stuff, the sort of things that working groups often do. And then in 2021, July 2021, so only a year ago, just over a year ago, we asked to have a meeting with the directors of the grants team. So that's I sit in Impact on Urban Health, we're the grants team, and we asked to meet the directors, the people who manage all the different programs, had a meeting with them, and we presented the case for the intersection in climate and health, why it's really important for this organization. We produced some slides, we shared those slides with the directors, we also shared it more widely, and we kind of made, you know, this was our pitch. This is why the organization needs to take this on as a mainstream thing. Did our pitch, and it was a hot day in the summer. We had a meeting. It was an online meeting. It was during lockdown, online meeting, and one afternoon. And to be honest, I came in from that meeting feeling very despondent because the enthusiasm was not they did not respond saying, yes, we see the light, we understand. They did not do that. They were like asking what felt like very operational questions, which is often how people think, how will we, you know, what are the mechanistic questions, which didn't seem to me to get the big picture. But also they said, two directors said, I think there were only 5 or 6 people in the room, 5 or 6 directors there. 2 of them said, this is one of many pressing concerns that we could work on, but we need to focus. And this feels like diffusing our focus we could be working on austerity, we could be working on, there's a whole load of things we could be doing, and we have to stay focused. And that felt to me like quite it was a gloomy day. I came away from that meeting quite unhappy and thinking, oh, well, that didn't really work. But what was interesting was that 3 months later, that group of directors, or some people from that, produced a strategy plan for the next 3 years. We're having a strategy refresh in the way organizations so often do. And as part of the strategy refresh, there was a line that said, we will look to integrate a climate lens across the grants teams, across our programmatic work. I was like, how did this land here? Like, they were so gloomy and unenthusiastic. But and I've asked a couple of people, but I haven't really figured out what the linchpin was. What I understand is that us making that case, even though the conversation wasn't that rich, we shared the agenda. It was clear that we had data to demonstrate that there's organizational support in the staff team for this. And it's harder to ignore. It was hard to ignore. So, and I think that when we shared those slides, well, I know the slides went beyond just that director team, went beyond. And basically, my kind of lesson such as it is that I want to share with you is that it's not always obvious where the change is going to come. The important thing is that we make our case, that we make it consistently, that we share it. So I think doing more than just having a chat, but actually documenting it in some way. Like, we work in the sorts of organizations that love a slide deck, and so that thing of giving people concrete. So we had in that slide deck, it had some information about the level of staff support. We had some information, some clear information on why these intersections really matter, the link within health inequality. So we made our case, and although we were clearly not particularly compelling in the room, there was enough there that somebody was able to take up a bit. So I guess for me, that's the important thing is to be deliberate about making your case, and to do that in the sorts of language that the organization understands. And for us, that is data, and inequality is a really important thing, and we have to make the connection to things that people already care about, that kind of thing. And then following, the other thing that happened in those few months was that we asked whether we could take this to the board, trustee board, our most senior, the strategic, the group of people who set who have ultimate governance over this organization. And we were, so we asked for time with the board agenda at a board meeting, and we got that. And we went to a board meeting and we shared a little bit like the presentation we did before. So we made the case to the board. And what was great there was that the board were more enthusiastic than our directors had been, because the directors got sort of stuck in the operational, the kind of the mechanistic, how can we do this? Well, boards are strategic by nature, they have to be. They don't, the operational stuff, they leave to the stuff, but the boards are strategic. And so from a strategic point of view, they could really see the point. And also that I'm sure that there were people around that board who, like you and I, are very anxious about climate, and very, carry that passion, that individual personal passion, that there were people around that table who had that. And the board said to us, this is all great. What would a more ambitious strategy look like? How can you build ambition to this? How can we ramp up the momentum? How can we build ambition? So then we were given this green light to be more ambitious about how we could integrate climate into our work. I'm going to stop talking there, Felicitas, and you can ask me some questions.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe you could also quickly highlight what you did on the financial side.
Yes, could you go to the next slide? Thank you, I'd forgotten that. So this is the work that we did, that our endowment team have been doing. So the most important thing when I was talking to the endowment team, how they came to this, I mean, this is their kind of ambition, but was that the first thing they did was they joined something called the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change. And basically that is a network, a resource of other foundations, investors who are interested in climate change. So it was kind of a peer group, and through that group we were able to access investor expertise and also be part of a bigger, it wasn't just us doing it on our own, part of a bigger group and people who were further on the journey than we were. And we also recognized that some of the work that we have to do is, this is about how we're going to aim to hit net zero by 2050 and what the targets are, etc. But one of the other things that we need to do is how to use our voice as an investor. So we have funded an organization called Share Action, and what they do is that they basically use shareholder voice to influence decisions at shareholder level. And we have funded and supported and joined that. And that's a way, and we know we've done that. We were already working with Share Action on sugar, because we're a health foundation and we're trying to get the sugar in levels of sugar reduced in children's food, in food generally. So we'd already done the Share Action work on something that was absolutely core to our business, but we were able to say actually Share Action could really help us on this too. So it was a way of using some stuff that we'd already done, and so starting with something that was already working and relationships that already existed, and broadening that out. And so essentially we are planning that by 2030 that we would reduce the emissions by half the current rate. So it was through the investors group we were able to baseline what the climate, what our carbon footprint, what portfolio emissions are now, and then from that we're able to this is the plan to reduce so that by the time we get to 2050 we're net zero.
And we've got time for just one question before we want to go into breakout groups, or maybe two. First question, could you give us a concrete example of where you switched from the previous portfolio to a project that incorporates climate into its strategy?
I suppose we're still at a relatively early stage on that. So the first thing that we're trying to do is, so as I said to you before, our thing about inequality. We really understand that one of the framing around climate is that people who are at the sharpest end of inequality don't often get to shape what climate action is happening. That that we don't quite know. We know that everybody's concerned about climate, including poor communities and minoritized communities and Black communities, but trying to understand how do Black communities engage with climate. What we've done is we've created a climate action fund, so a small pot of money that we have released to the local neighborhoods, area, and we've said to them, if there's anything you're doing that you think connects with climate, please apply to this pot of money. We will grant a grant to do that. And from that, the reason we've done that is because that will tell us where is the energy? What are people doing already? When you say to communities, what action do you want to take on climate? What action makes sense to you in your lives in the context of your reality? This fund will give us all that rich data. We will understand it. I think we've started. There's quite a lot of food growing. That's one of the things that people can really connect with. There's stuff around insulation. There's stuff around solar. People want to, so you can see what are people concerned, and then from that we can build a program. So we can build a solar program. We can build a program.
I think it's a great idea because it could also be an easier way to start infusing the foundation portfolio by setting aside just a small pot of money that can be used by the current grantees just to gauge the energy on where people want to focus on. Maybe one last question before we go into breakout groups. What did you think, or what do you think is the most useful to convince a board? because very often, staff is very motivated, but boards take a little more time. Is it the science? Is it staff getting together? And as you said, you showed where staff sits. Is it the passion of a small group of pioneers that take this to the board through the board of directors like you did? Or is it the push by grantees? What do you think is the most useful? Or is it all four?
I mean, I suppose it is awful, but I really think that I'm not sure it's the science, as we know on so many levels. And the science helps, but actually that it doesn't seem to be compelling enough. For us, what made a difference was to be able to show that there's a strong staff push for this. Because in the end, organizations are made up of people. Like the only resource that our organization has is their endowment and is us. Like, there's nothing else. Like you only have your financial resources and your human capital. You haven't got anything else. So if your human capital is wanting, this is something that they really want to do, that seemed in the conversation we had with the board, that seemed to be something that was really a high motivator. And then I think you do have to connect it back to your own mission. Like, their role is to be custodians of the mission. I sit on boards. I think lots of us probably sit on boards. So you're custodian of the mission. That's what you're there to do, to make sure that this mission continues. And so I think that thing of being really thoughtful about how to connect it to mission. And one of the things we've done is we've commissioned research. We've commissioned research to help us to articulate it better. Because we can articulate it so far, but there are more ways that we can do it. We've commissioned some research on just transitions. So we're saying that so this is a very learning organization. So if we go to a board and say we want to learn about this, we want to learn more, that so it's about understanding enough about the strategic drivers for your board. So our board love to learn. Our board love to be led, are keen to be responsive to staff priorities.
Cool. Radhika, thanks so much. And really helpful, and looking forward to staying in touch on what happens next. But first off, let me turn it over to Natalia to send us off into breakout groups. And we'll look in the breakout groups at some of these issues that we want to share a little bit where we're at in the journey, what are some of the challenges, and also look at what you need to integrate this climate lens into your work. So Natalia, maybe you can send us off into 2 separate groups.
Yes, sure. But first, I will share with you the link to the Jamboard. So you have it, because if I send you to the breakout rooms, you will not be able to see it.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. I will send you to a breakout room. I don't know why you weren't sent. The same to Luis.
Thanks.
Okay. Oh, very good.
Hello, Phoebe. Sorry. Yes, feel free to stay here and have a little break of the before they came back. They come back.